Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Tom Walker with Conversion XL, and we're trying out a new feature here on the blog where we're going to be talking to some very smart people who deal in conversion, product design, and a lot of different areas where you're going to be able to learn from what they're doing and the work that they're doing to create products that people actually want to interact with. Today, we're actually going to be talking to Nir Eyal, the author of NirInfar.com, and Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. He's been doing some excellent research in the way of product design and basically how to keep getting people back to your product so it becomes a part of their daily lives and a habit and not just something that they go to occasionally. I'm going to let Nir really introduce himself here and kind of explain his credentials and what got him into this research, and then we'll take it from there. So Nir, thank you so much for coming on to this, to trying out this new experiment with us.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad to be the kickoff this hopefully series of interviews that you do. But it's a real pleasure to be here, Tommy. And just to give a little background on my work, my name is Nir Eyal, and I write a blog called NirInfar.com, where we really focus on the intersection of technology and psychology. And I recently published a book, as you mentioned, called Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, which is based on a class that I teach at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, as well as the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design, also at Stanford. And the book is really all about how product designers can make their products habit-forming.
Now, what got you into the research in the first place? I think that's a really fascinating thing. Like, I know I check my phone a million times a day, and I'm definitely on Facebook probably more than I should be. What is it that got you to kind of step outside of yourself for a minute there and say, like, what is it that gets us to do this?
Yeah.
It's very fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, a few things. Number one, I was at a company back in that started back in 2008 that was at the intersection of gaming and advertising. And in that role, I saw hundreds of experiments, right? I saw hundreds of companies come and go and hundreds of features tried. Many of them failed, but some of them succeeded. And in that role, I got to see what was the difference between the products that could create high engagement and those that didn't. And so I wanted to really codify a pattern, if there was any, as to what it was about these products that made them so habit-forming and so engaging. And so I've spent about the past 2.5 years researching how these products form user habits. And so that's really what kicked off my research.
Excellent. And you actually created a 4-step kind of process or model for that. Tell me a little bit more about that model and how, and the different steps that go into it and how that can apply to the habit-forming product creation process.
Sure. Yeah. So the model is called the Hook model, and it has 4 main steps. And this came out of codification of this research where I looked at what made these companies that compel us. You know, you mentioned email, you mentioned Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and Instagram. These companies that in a relatively very short period of time dramatically change user behavior. You know, we all know how difficult it is to get people to do things. How do these companies seemingly, overnight in just a few short years manage to touch so many people's lives and manage to get them to do these behaviors, which many of them didn't used to do before, and do it multiple times a day? So this process, what I found, the design pattern, which I call the Hook model, has 4 steps: a trigger, an action, a reward, and an investment. And we see that time and time again that companies that are able to create habits send users through these 4 steps quickly and frequently.
Excellent. And what would you say the area, like if you were to look at that 4-step process, what would you say the area most founders or product designers are kind of missing the boat on when it comes to designing the addictive products? Because, I think we all have the idea of, I'm going to create a product, but then we don't really think about the behavior that's going to be behind it. So where are most people missing the mark?
Yeah, I think when every business is specific, right? Every business has their own issues when it comes to the hook. And what I find is in my consulting practice and in my research is that you'll find one area or another where where a business might be weak in forming a habit if it's finding that engagement is a problem. I will tailor my answer a bit to your audience because of the conversion aspect of most of what you write about and what I think your audience is interested in. I would say that when it comes to e-commerce, when it comes to conversion sites, what I many times see is that companies focus too much on users checking out and not on checking in. That
Okay.
companies focus on making their sites very slick, right? Making their
Mm-hmm.
sites easy to use so that customers can quickly get through and, give their credit card and leave. And I think that's actually the opposite of what we want to do when we're thinking about creating habit-forming products. We want to figure out how can we create touch points for the user to want to check in with us as frequently as possible. If you think about the most habit-forming products that we use, the most habit-forming technologies, these are things we use multiple times a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Intraday behaviors. Now, that doesn't mean that every product requires a habit. Let's be very clear. Lots of
Right.
businesses don't require habits. They can bring customers in through marketing. They can bring customers in through search engine optimization. There's all kinds of ways, advertising, there's all kinds of ways to bring users to your site. However, if your product is the type of product, if your business model requires users to come by themselves, to do what I call unprompted user engagement, right? If you require unprompted user engagement, you have to follow this pattern that we find time and time again within habit-forming technologies.
Excellent. And I kind of want to kind of piggyback on that for a second. I personally, I've actually done a video on my own loyalty to Zappos, and it's because, and that's definitely one where I don't have to go there every single day in order to buy whatever I need to buy from them, but I have this sort of affinity to them because of the way their customer service works and the way that they keep in communication with their customers. I'm on their product list, but they're not spamming me every day. They have a real seemingly good paying attention to the way I use their site, and yet it is habitual for me now to go, oh, if I need a new pair of shoes, I'm going to go straight there.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that's interesting too, is that it doesn't require daily use, but it is definitely. I mean, there's brand loyalty there, of course, but it's also, I would say, it's habit. That's the first place I look, and probably won't even look anywhere else. So
yeah, and that behavior, when a customer stops thinking, so to speak, right? When a customer doesn't deliberate anymore about that action, about that key behavior, that's really the definition of a habit. A definition of a habit is a behavior that we do with little or no conscious thought. Think about whether you consider, do you actually deliberate whether to use Google or Bing? Not really, right? It's a habit. It's something we don't even care if Bing is better, right? They've actually done
as much as they try.
They try, right? But it's an ingrained habit. We don't actually even ask ourselves if a competitor is better. You don't ask yourself if you could find a better price for your shoes somewhere other than Zappos, or Amazon does this to me all the time, right? Somebody tells me about a book, I'm going to go buy it on Amazon. I don't even shop around anymore because I've gone through these 4 steps of the hook cycle so many times that the association of when I have this problem, when I have this need, when I have this pain point, the solution is right here. A habit has been formed.
Now, I'm going to go off book a little bit for a second because I think this is also very interesting. Do you think that there's definitely an early mover advantage to kind of like claiming territory in someone's mind space when it comes to the hook model?
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, look, I don't believe that if any guru tells you that they have the answer for forever and ever, then there's probably something going on, right? They're probably telling you a lie. And even the most solid habits can be changed, right? There's technologies that we didn't use before that we now use today. But what we find is that when a habit-forming technology typically comes about when there's some kind of profound change in interface, right? We think about how when the Apple App Store was started, almost 6 years ago?
10 years ago.
No, the App Store, iTunes.
iTunes was 10 years ago.
Yeah. Is just had a 5-year anniversary, so a little bit more than 5 years ago, which is actually pretty remarkable when you think about how young it is. When there was this new interface, when the mobile phone started to become widely adopted, those first movers that were able to claim territory, because they formed habits and because those habits are so hard to shake, that there is a huge mover advantage. Now, when the next company can actually take away those habits and own those moments instead is when there's another interface change. So a company that I profile in the book that I think is one of the apps that a lot of people actually don't think about when they think about very successful tech companies is called the Bible. So the Bible app just
Yep.
just reached their 100 millionth install. It's an incredibly successful company, and you know, it's a very widely used app, and it's amazing. You know, I profile that company because they do an amazing job of forming user habits. And so there was kind of not only was there a first mover advantage, there were other competitors at the time, but because they really focused on creating that reading habit of reading the Bible every day, they benefited from that tremendously. Now now they're number one by far. And it's not only the Bible app, it's you know, the usual
Angry
suspect.
Birds.
Exactly. It's Pinterest and Instagram and many of these companies that were first at the interface.
Excellent. And actually, we've been talking a lot about competition on the blog too recently. And I think the thing that stood out to me the most was towards the very beginning, where you said if you want to be competitive in an established place, in a place where there's habits already formed, you have to be 9 times better than the competition.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Can you talk about maybe some not so well-known e-commerce or SaaS company that you've worked with, or something like that, that has kind of broken some habits or taken some of that share away from bigger people?
Well, I want to make sure we address that 9 times better stat. There was a Harvard Business Review study that showed that many times what the user sees as better is actually a lot less than what the company perceives that the product is better. That there's a gap. You know, the company tends to see the product as 3 times better, or I think it was 3 times better, and that the user doesn't see it as that much better. And so there's this huge disparity between the two. The lesson here is that to displace an existing habit, because habits are so sticky, the product has to compress the distance between the trigger, between where the user decides they need a solution, to the reward. And if you think about it, that's actually the nature of all technological innovation, right? I don't care if it's the cotton gin or Twitter. It's all about closing the gap between what cues the behavior, the identification of the need, either consciously or subconsciously, and the achievement of the reward. So the real function, and I think when we design technologies, is how can we take out steps? How can we compress the time it takes or the effort it takes to get to the reward?
Excellent. I think that's brilliant, and I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, I want to kind of say, let's go back to the other question though. Can you think of any like not so well known companies that are taking that over, that are doing that really well right now?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, one company that stands out, they're pre-commerce, but I think that's where they're going, is Pinterest. And I think I mentioned it because I don't think people think about Pinterest necessarily as a commerce company. I don't think they've actually started selling goods and services, but I think they're at the cutting edge of this, you know, building a habit around commerce as entertainment. That, back to this point around not focusing so much on people checking out, but focusing on people checking in, right?
Right.
Pinterest has built this. I mean, it is about commerce. I mean, I would estimate that more than half of what's on Pinterest are goods, right? Are purchasable goods that people are collecting and sharing and pinning. But they don't go there to shop for them. They go there to spend time, to be entertained, to scratch this itch, to relieve boredom, right? It's not about a functional need that I need this specific product. It's about a place to spend some time and relieve boredom, which is a very different internal trigger than what you see in a typical e-commerce site.
Right, and it actually, there are kind of 2 points I want to get on with that. One of them, I think, in order to really do that, you have to be doing a lot of the customer development process, right? Understanding, I mean, you're talking about exposing that gap, exposing that need, and with every need that's fulfilled, there's always going to be another need that kind of comes into place. So if you're small, you know, then I think spending time in that customer development process is going to definitely help you out there and in getting that feedback loop with your customers. Then the other part is kind of what you're talking about, checking in, you customers checking in. Do you think, are you familiar with the mere exposure effect?
Tell me more.
Have you? The mere exposure effect, it's this psychological phenomenon that's found that the more you're exposed to something, the more likely you are to prefer it. I mean, it's very simple when you think about it. Yeah. I mean, that's what a lot of the core of advertising was based off of. And so, being able to create that sort of experience and understanding who it is that you're talking to is going to really get people checking in, like you're talking about. So,
Yeah,
thank you.
that's right. Yeah, and part of my work, my work I think fits hand in glove with the customer development process, because what I found in my
Mhm.
experience with starting two tech companies and then in my consulting practice as well is that the hardest part of customer development, and more specifically the lean startup methodology, is of those three steps of build, measure, learn that most of us now are familiar with, right? We know the
Mhm.
lean methodology of build, measure, learn. The part that I struggled most with, and the part that I see companies having the most difficult time with, is not the measuring or the learning, it's the building, right?
Mhm.
Building is where the blood, sweat, and tears go. It's where all the money goes. And so the crux of my work is to figure out how can we build the right thing sooner? How can we spend less time and less waste guessing? And so what I
Right.
typically find is, if people haven't read about Lean Startup, then the way they make decisions on what we should build is what the highest paid person in the room says they should build. And if they're really cutting edge and they're innovative, then they start listening to customers. That's the second level. But I think there's another level where we say, look, what are people not willing to tell us or not able to tell us because they don't actually know themselves, but that still guides their decisions? And for those insights, we have to look into consumer psychology.
Ah, fantastic. That's such a brilliant little nugget there. Thank you. Now, I'm going to ask you one final question here because I told you it was going to be a short interview. So, if I were to look at my existing product, say, let's hypothetically say it's an e-commerce site, I sell T-shirts with funny sayings on them, right? What metric should I start with to find what that hook is going to be?
Yeah. So I think the first step is to identify how frequently you would expect a habituated user to interact with your product. And
Okay.
frequency is a big deal. We know that frequency is a huge determinant of the likelihood of someone forming a habit. So if your product is something that's not used within the span of about a week's time, your chance of forming a habit are pretty low. So there's two options. One, you could say to yourself, well, that's fine. I don't need to form a habit, right? I can drive customers to my product with advertising, with search engine optimization. There's all kinds of ways to drive users.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you depend upon unprompted user engagement, you've got to find a way to get customers checking in within the span of a week or less time. So that's one big thing I would make sure to check on with anyone's product that's looking to form a habit. And then once you've done that, then the next step is to make sure you've got those 4 steps and figure out where are you weakest. And this would be longer than I have time to explain here, but the book goes into a lot more detail around is your trigger working? And I lay out a bunch of different examples and advice for how to craft a proper trigger and to create an association with what I call internal triggers. And then your action phase. Is your behavior simple enough? Then the variable reward. Are you addressing the user's need and yet leaving them wanting more? And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, the investment phase. Are you getting users to put something into the product which increases the likelihood of them returning in the future?
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Nir. I'm going to just kind of give you a little, if there's anything else that you'd like to say before we sign off here, let us know. And other than that, thank you so much for coming on to the show. I appreciate it so much.
Well, thank you so much, Tommy. It was a pleasure being here. And of course, my blog is nirandfar.com, and the book is available on Amazon. Thank you so much.
No problem. And I just want to specify, too, nirandfar.com is nirandfar.com, just so we don't, we're sending people to the right place. Thanks so much. Have a great one.
Thank you.